The first thing you learn about dying in space is that it's quieter than the poets make it sound. No grand symphony, no cosmic choir, just the steady hiss of oxygen bleeding out through a hull breach the size of my fist, and the distant whisper of solar wind against twisted metal. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I've been flying freight runs between the outer colonies for 7 years. 7 years of hauling everything from medical supplies to mining equipment across the black, keeping the frontier fed and functioning. 7 years of telling myself that one day I'd save enough credits to buy my own plot of land somewhere green, somewhere with a sky that didn't end in stars. That dream died with my ship 3 hours ago, somewhere in the Kepler Drift. The Esperanza had been good to me, a modified cargo hauler with enough personality to keep me company during the long hauls and enough armor plating to shrug off the occasional pirate potshot. She'd carried me through asteroid fields and solar storms, through the kind of deep space that makes you forget what color looks like. But even the most faithful ship can't argue with a micro-meteorite traveling at 30,000 kilometers per second. I'd managed to nurse her down to the surface of Kepler 442c before her reactor went cold. The planet wasn't supposed to be habitable. Too much radiation from its red dwarf star, too thin an atmosphere, too many reasons why the survey teams had marked it as unsuitable for colonization and moved on. But unsuitable was better than vacuum, and barely breathable was better than not breathing at all. The crash had been educational, the kind of education that leaves you with a concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and a ship that looked like it had been put through a recycling compactor. Twice. Now I stood in the rust-colored dust beside the Esperanza's grave, watching the alien sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and burnt orange. The air tasted of copper and ozone, thin enough that each breath felt like sipping atmosphere through a straw. My emergency beacon was broadcasting on all frequencies, but out here in the drift, it might be months before anyone picked up the signal. That's when I saw the smoke. A thin gray line rising from beyond a ridge of weathered stone, maybe 2 kilometers to the east. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant someone who knew how to make it. And someone who knew how to make fire on a dead world was exactly the kind of person I needed to meet. The walk took me an hour, picking my way across terrain that looked like it had been sculpted by a particularly vindictive god. The ground was cracked hardpan, split by ravines that dropped away into shadow. Strange formations of crystal jutted up from the earth like frozen lightning, catching the fading light and throwing it back in prismatic fragments. The smoke led me to a homestead that had no business existing. It was built into the side of a natural rock formation, part cave, part construction. Solar collectors spread across the stone like mechanical flowers, and I could see the gleam of a water reclamation unit tucked into an alcove. A small garden struggled against the hostile soil, protected by a transparent dome that hummed with the sound of atmospheric processors. And sitting on the porch, cleaning what looked like a plasma rifle, was the most stubborn-looking man I'd ever seen. He was maybe 60, with the kind of weathered face that comes from decades of frontier living. His hair had gone white, but his eyes were sharp as laser cutters, and when he looked up at me, I felt like I was being catalogued, assessed, and probably found wanting. "Well," he said, his voice carrying the slow drawl of the outer colonies, "you're not dead. That's something, I suppose." "Not for lack of trying," I replied. nodding toward the smoke rising from my ship's general direction. Elena Vasquez. My ship had an argument with a rock. The rock won. He set down the rifle with deliberate care. Marcus Webb, and before you ask, no, I don't have a ship. No, I can't call for help. And no, you probably shouldn't have landed here. Didn't have much choice in the matter. Besides, the surveys said this place was uninhabited. Something flickered across his face. Too quick to read, but it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Surveys say a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. He stood, and I noticed the way his hand never strayed far from the rifle. You hungry? Got stew on the fire? Real meat, not that synthesized protein paste they serve on the freight haulers. The mention of food made my stomach growl loud enough to hear. Real meat? On a dead world? World's not as dead as the surveys claim. He gestured toward the door. Come on in. We'll get some food in you, and then we can discuss your situation. The inside of his homestead was a study in practical engineering. Every surface served multiple purposes. Every system was redundant and efficient. The walls were lined with supplies, enough to last years, maybe decades. It was the kind of setup you built when you never intended to leave. How long have you been here? I asked, settling into a chair that had been carved from native stone. 15 years, give or take. He ladled stew into a bowl and handed it to me. The meat was tender, the vegetables fresh enough to make me wonder how he managed it in this environment. Used to be a whole settlement here. 300 souls, maybe more. We called it Haven. Used to be. His face went carefully neutral. They left. All of them. All but me. I took another spoonful of stew, studying his face. There was more to the story. There always was, with men like Marcus Webb. Men who stayed behind when everyone else ran. Why'd they leave? Because they saw something they didn't like. And you didn't see it. Oh, I saw it. He sat down across from me, his own bowl untouched. I just didn't run. The silence stretched between us like a held breath. Outside, the wind was picking up, making the solar collectors creak and whisper. The sound should have been comforting, the sound of civilization holding back the wild. Instead, it made me think of things moving in the dark. What did they see, Marcus? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. The lights. I waited, but he didn't elaborate. What kind of lights? The kind that dance in the sky when there's no aurora. The kind that move with purpose, like they're looking for something. He met my eyes. The kind that come closer every night. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the thin atmosphere. How long since the others left? 2 years, maybe 3. Time gets fluid out here. And the lights? Still coming. I set down my spoon, appetite suddenly gone. Marcus, what aren't you telling me? He stood and walked to a window, a thick piece of transparent aluminum that looked out over the darkening landscape. You ever hear of the Kepler anomalies? Vaguely. Deep space phenomena. Unexplained energy readings. That's the official line. What they don't tell you in the reports is that the anomalies are getting stronger, more frequent, and they're not random. He turned back to me. They're searching. Searching for what? I don't know, but I think they found it. The light started just after full dark. I was helping Marcus secure the homestead for the night, a ritual that involved more locks, shields, and defensive measures than seemed reasonable for a man living alone on a dead world. The atmospheric processors hummed louder as night fell, working overtime to maintain breathable air against the planet's hostile environment. That's when I saw them. At first, they looked like stars, distant points of light scattered across the alien sky. But stars don't move in formation, and they don't pulse with the rhythm of a heartbeat. These lights danced and swirled, sometimes joining together into larger patterns, sometimes breaking apart into smaller fragments that darted across the heavens like luminous insects. Beautiful, aren't they? Marcus's voice was soft, almost reverent. They're not natural. No, they're not. As we watched, the lights began to descend. Not falling, descending, with the deliberate motion of something under intelligent control. They moved like a school of fish, flowing around obstacles, responding to each other's movements with perfect coordination. How long do they usually? The light stopped. All of them, as if responding to some unheard signal. For a moment, they hung motionless in the air, perhaps a kilometer above us. Then slowly, they began to arrange themselves into a pattern, a spiral, vast and complex, with arms that reached across half the sky. And at the center of the spiral, a single light burned brighter than the rest. A star that pulsed with colors I didn't have names for. They're beautiful, I whispered, and immediately regretted it. Because the moment I spoke, every light in the formation turned toward us, toward me. Marcus grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh. Inside. Now. We ran for the homestead, and I felt rather than saw the lights following our movement. The air around us began to hum with energy, making my skin tingle and my hair stand on end. By the time we reached the door, the entire sky was alive with dancing luminescence. Marcus slammed the door behind us and activated what looked like enough shielding to stop a military assault. "Don't look at them directly," he said, his voice tight with controlled fear. "And whatever you do, don't go outside until they're gone." "What are they?" "I don't know, but they're interested in you." The light stayed until dawn. I could hear them moving around the homestead, a sound like wind chimes made of electricity. Sometimes they would press against the windows, leaving patterns of phosphorescence on the transparent aluminum. Sometimes they would call, if you could call it that. A sound like music, like mathematics, like the universe singing to itself in frequencies just beyond human comprehension. I wanted to go outside. The desire was almost overwhelming, a pull that seemed to reach into my bones and tug me toward the door. It took all my willpower to stay inside, to keep my eyes away from the windows, to ignore the beautiful, terrible music that promised answers to questions I'd never thought to ask. Marcus sat in a corner, his plasma rifle across his knees, watching me with the intensity of a man who'd seen this before. "How long?" I asked through gritted teeth. "Until sunrise. They always leave at sunrise." "Why didn't you go with the others?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because someone needs to witness. Someone needs to remember." He shifted the rifle in his hands. "And because I think they're waiting for something. Someone." The implication hit me like a physical blow. "You think they're waiting for me? Your ship didn't just crash here by accident, Elena. That micro-meteorite hit you right at the edge of the system, sent you tumbling toward the one planet in the drift that's supposed to be uninhabitable. But you survived the crash. You found me. And now they're here, more active than they've been in months. The music outside grew louder, more insistent. I could feel it in my teeth, in my bones, in the spaces between thoughts. What do they want? I think they want to take you home. Dawn came like salvation, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The lights faded with the sunrise, retreating to whatever dimension they called home. But their message was clear. They would be back. Marcus and I spent the morning in his workshop, a cave carved deep into the rock, where he'd built everything from atmospheric processors to communication equipment. He was good with his hands, the kind of engineer who could make miracles out of scrap metal and determination. "Your ship," he said, bent over a schematic he'd sketched from memory. "The Esperanza, she's not completely dead. Her reactor's cold, navigation's fried, life support's running on backup power. But her quantum communicator's still intact. I saw it when I checked the crash site this morning." He looked up at me, with eyes that held a glimmer of hope. "We can't fix your ship, but we might be able to boost the signal from your emergency beacon, get a message out to someone who can help. How long would that take? A day, maybe 2, if we're careful about it. And the lights, they'll be back tonight, and they'll be stronger." We worked through the day, salvaging components from the Esperanza and integrating them with Marcus's communication array. It was delicate work, the kind that required absolute precision and more luck than I was comfortable depending on. But Marcus knew what he was doing, and slowly, piece by piece, we built something that might just reach the shipping lanes. As we worked, he told me about Haven, about the families who'd come to Kepler 442c looking for a new start, drawn by survey reports that had somehow missed the planet's more unusual characteristics. About the first night the lights appeared, beautiful and terrifying and utterly alien. About the way they'd grown bolder over the months, coming closer, staying longer, until people started disappearing. Not taken, he was careful to clarify. They left, walked out into the night of their own free will, smiling like they'd finally found what they'd been looking for their whole lives. But you stayed. I stayed. He paused in his work, staring at a component with the intensity of a man trying to solve the universe's greatest puzzle. My wife, Sarah, she was the first to go, walked out one night during the second month, said the lights were calling her home. I found her in the morning, maybe 5 kilometers from the settlement. She was changed. Changed how? She was still Sarah, still had her memories, her personality, but there was something else there too, something vast and ancient and utterly alien. She tried to explain it to me, said the lights weren't invaders, they were gardeners, tending to something that had been growing here for millions of years. What kind of something? She called it the song, said it was the universe learning how to sing, and that humanity was meant to be part of the chorus. He set down his tools and looked at me. She wanted me to come with her, to join the others who'd been called. Why didn't you? Because someone had to stay behind. Someone had to remember what we were before we became something else. He picked up his tools again, hands steady despite the weight of memory. And because I was afraid. The communication array came online, just as the sun touched the horizon. Marcus had managed to boost my emergency beacon signal by a factor of 10, enough to reach the shipping lanes and maybe, just maybe, catch the attention of a passing freighter. But as the first stars appeared in the alien sky, I realized it might not matter. The lights were coming back, more of them this time, brighter, more purposeful. They descended from the heavens like falling stars, but instead of burning out, they grew stronger as they approached the surface. The air around the homestead began to hum with energy, and I could feel that familiar pull. Stronger now, almost irresistible. Elena. Marcus's voice seemed to come from very far away. The beacon's active. Help should be here within hours. Hours might be too long. The lights had formed their spiral again, but this time it was centered directly above us. The music was louder now, more complex. Harmonies layering upon harmonies, until the sound became something you felt rather than heard. And at the center of it all, that single bright star pulsed with colors that shouldn't exist. I found myself walking toward the door. Elena, don't. But I was already reaching for the handle, my hand moving without conscious thought. The music promised answers, promised belonging, promised an end to the loneliness that had followed me across the black for 7 long years. All I had to do was step outside. Marcus grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. Fight it. Whatever they're showing you, it's not real. How do you know? Because I've been fighting it for 3 years. The confession stopped me cold. What? You think I stayed behind out of duty? Out of stubbornness? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I stayed because I can't leave. Every night they call to me. Every night I have to choose between walking out that door and staying human. Then why? Because someone has to witness. Someone has to remember. He met my eyes, and I saw the cost of his vigil written in every line of his face. And because I keep hoping that someday, someone will come who's strong enough to break the pattern. The lights outside pulsed brighter, and the music crescendoed into something that was less sound than pure meaning. I could see it now. The song that Sarah had tried to describe. A vast cosmic harmony that stretched across galaxies, connecting every star, every world, every living thing in a web of consciousness that made individual identity seem small and pointless. It was beautiful. It was terrible. And it was calling me home. I can see them, I whispered. The others, Sarah and the rest, they're happy. Are they still human? The question cut through the music like a blade. Because looking at the figures dancing among the lights, I could see that Marcus was right. They were still recognizably the people they'd been, but they were also something more. Something that had traded individual consciousness for membership in a cosmic choir. I don't know, I admitted. Then you have a choice to make. The music reached a crescendo that made my bones ache. The door handle turned under my hand, and cool night air touched my face. One step. That's all it would take. One step, and I could join the song, become part of something infinitely larger than myself. But as I stood on the threshold between human and something else, I heard another sound cutting through the cosmic harmony. The distant whine of fusion engines. A ship, coming in fast. The lights heard it too. Their music faltered, became discordant, almost angry. The spiral formation began to break apart, individual lights darting back and forth like confused insects. They don't like visitors, Marcus said, his voice tight with hope and fear. The ship that landed in the clearing beside the Esperanza's wreckage was a frontier rescue vessel. Sleek, fast, and heavily armed. Its searchlights cut through the darkness like swords, and wherever they touched, the alien lights retreated. The rescue team that emerged wore full environmental suits and carried weapons designed for more than human threats. Their leader was a woman about my age, with the kind of confidence that comes from years of pulling people out of impossible situations. Elena Vasquez. Her voice crackled through external speakers. "We got your beacon. Time to go." I looked back at Marcus, who was watching the scene with the expression of a man who'd just seen a miracle he'd stopped believing in. "What about you?" "I can't leave. You know that." "The hell you can't." I grabbed his arm, tried to pull him toward the rescue ship. "They've got medical facilities, psychologists, people who can help you break whatever hold this place has on you." He shook his head. "Someone has to witness, remember. I know." I met his eyes. "But you've done your job, Marcus. You saved me. Now let someone else carry the burden." For a moment I thought he would refuse. The lights were regrouping, forming new patterns in the sky, and I could feel their pull even through the rescue ship's interference. But then Marcus looked at the ship, at the promise of human contact after 3 years of isolation, and something in his face broke. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." The rescue ship lifted off just as the lights made their final approach. Through the viewport, I watched them descend toward the empty homestead, searching for the mines they'd been trying to claim. But we were already beyond their reach, climbing toward the stars and the shipping lanes and the messy, complicated, gloriously human civilization that waited among them. Marcus sat beside me, staring out at the cosmos with eyes that were learning to see it as something other than a prison. The rescue team's medic was already working on him, treating 3 years of isolation and alien influence with the kind of matter-of-fact competence that made the impossible seem routine. "What happens now?" I asked the team leader. "Now, we file a report. Mark this system as off-limits to civilian traffic. Maybe send a science team to figure out what those things actually are." She shrugged. "Standard procedure for anomalous contact." I thought about the song, about the cosmic harmony that had promised to make me part of something infinitely larger than myself, about Sarah and the others, dancing among alien lights in a form of existence that might be transcendence or might be extinction. "What if they're not hostile?" I asked. "What if they're offering something we need?" The team leader looked at me with the kind of expression reserved for people who'd spent too much time in the black. "That's above my pay grade, Vasquez. I just pull people out of trouble." But as our ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving Kepler 442c and its dancing lights behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd left something important behind. Not just Marcus's vigil or the empty homestead, but a question that humanity wasn't ready to answer. What did it mean to be human when the universe was offering to make us something more? The answer, I suspected, would have to wait for someone braver than me, someone willing to step through that door and join the song, knowing they might never find their way back to what they'd been before. But that's a story for another day and another storyteller. As for me, I had credits to earn and freight to haul, and somewhere out there in the black, a new ship with my name on it. The frontier was calling, and this time I intended to answer with my humanity intact.